Welcome back, and today is a pretty special edition. Brian and Mike, we used to work together up in Sudbury, and now we're on the YouTube. Brian, how are you doing today?
We are on the YouTube. That is fun. That is fun. But I mean, even the internet can't keep us apart, Mike. So there you go.
Oh, exactly. So it's been a few years since we worked together, but we've still found ways to stay in contact to talk hockey with your Wolves broadcasts. You've had me on a couple times, and now I figured with the YouTube channel, it'd be your turn to now come and talk hockey on my broadcast side.
Well, hey, thanks for having me on the YouTube. I appreciate that.
Hey, no problem. And I do like the fact that you're in your garage with your Sudbury Wolves flag in the background. You're representing quite well.
You know what? You mentioned to me how my backdrop is very Northern Ontario. There's a heater above my head. There's a Wolves flag. There's a Leafs flag, and there's also a snowmobile. So
that
what
sums
else do
up
you need?
that sums up Northern Ontario. It's fantastic.
Exactly.
So as I mentioned, we're going to talk some hockey because this weekend is the first game between the Barrie Colts and the Sudbury Wolves this season. And just looking at the rosters between these two teams, this might be one of the more competitive seasons between these two Central Division rivals. And for you calling the games in Sudbury, you're seeing it firsthand. How's Sudbury looking so far?
It's been interesting calling Sudbury Wolves games this season. I think last year, it was a quick exit, obviously, from the first round of the playoffs. It was the first round sweep against the Peterborough Petes, and that was a bummer, I think, for fans here in the Sudbury side of things heading into this season. And it's not just myself, a lot of people, and not just in Sudbury, across the board. This is one of the best looking Sudbury Wolves teams on paper, anyways, that I think I have seen. I've only been in Sudbury for about 10 and a half years. And ironically, what brought me to Sudbury was a job where I worked with you, Mike.
Yeah.
And I've been in Sudbury for about 10 and a half years now. And this is probably one of the best teams that I have ever seen since I've started watching the team and obviously started calling the team on paper, top to bottom. You might even say a fully loaded team, right? From goaltending to forwards, even through the defensive core as well. And so I wouldn't say they've flown out of the gate by any means. Not like a Mississauga Steelheads team or a Sioux Greyhounds. They have looked strong, but they've also had their moments of maybe surprise as well, where we haven't exactly seen the offensive lethal punch as many have expected, especially when you've got guys like David Goyette, Quentin Musty up front, just back from NHL development camps as well. And really just about everybody's back right now. Overall, the team is looking good. Obviously, you can tell that there are still some kinks that need to be worked out. Coming off of a busy weekend, they played Friday, they played Sunday. Friday, they fell behind. They were down 2-0 against a rather strong Owen Sound team. Ended up winning that one in overtime 3-2. And it was Jabril Toure who scored 2 goals in that game, the defenseman who was just back from the Ottawa development camp. And so fans were losing it at the Sudbury Community Arena. Almost 4,000 fans, by the way, at that Friday night home game, which is huge for the Nickel City. And then Sunday, a bit of a different story. We had the Ottawa 67s visiting. And I think, fans and I think media personnel, we were expecting it to be a little bit more, maybe more intense as the two teams had met each other like just over a week before, essentially, maybe 2 weeks before. And it was a 5-2 loss for Sudbury in Ottawa. Now, the 67s, all the credit to them as they played a heck of a game. They were rock solid, top to bottom. Max Donoso, their goaltender, played a near perfect game. Actually, it was a perfect game. It was a 4-0 shutout game. And the Wolves offense just seemed to be a little snake bitten. They could not beat the goaltender. And again, it for yourself, Mike. Sometimes you just run into a hot goaltender. That's clearly the case from Sunday afternoon in Sudbury. But guys like Goyette, maybe a little bit snake bitten right now. But we're so early on, right? So it's been a fun team to watch so far, and there's almost this sense of anticipation. I don't want to use the word expectation because that does set the bar incredibly high,
Yeah.
but there's a sense of anticipation for the Sudbury Wolves team, like they are really going to come flying out of the gate at one of these points.
Yeah, and it seems as though everyone you talk to around the Ontario Hockey League, they're picking the Sudbury Wolves as maybe that team that could win the Eastern Conference. In the East, I think pretty wide open right now. It's going to be competitive down the stretch. Of course, there's going to be some changes, but My one concern coming into the year was the penalties, because last year the Sudbury Wolves leading the league in penalty minutes, and then in the preseason, we saw that game against Sault Ste. Marie where things got a little out of hand. Are you seeing those since then, that maybe this team is starting to play a more disciplined hockey game?
I would say yes. I would definitely say yes. In fact, and weirdly enough, Sunday afternoon, using that game as an example, they had issues on the complete opposite end. Their power play, they are the Wolves right now are ranked, I think, dead last in the Ontario Hockey League when it comes to their man advantage. They went 0 for 8 on Sunday afternoon on the man advantage, and they themselves were fairly disciplined, other than Ethan Larma getting ejected from the game after a high hit on, I believe it was Josh Brady, if I recall, of the Ottawa 67s. He left the game after an upper body collision. He was a little disoriented after he got up off the ice. That being said, overall, you can definitely tell that the message has been sent in the dressing room. We need to be more disciplined. And I would say overall, they have been. Obviously, there's the odd penalty here and there, and there's the few that you're like, maybe not a good idea to take a penalty there. It's never really a good time to take a penalty. But overall, and I know we're so early in the season, I would say that the team top to bottom has got the message, have to be disciplined.
Well, and I think for every team right now, it's you're trying to generate that chemistry, and you already touched on it. Quentin Musty just coming back from San Jose camp, Toure coming back from Ottawa. So, with Guyette, he's got quite a few assists so far this season. So you have to figure that once they get this chemistry going, they figure out their games with the specialty teams. This team should be one of the top tier teams in the Eastern Conference.
Absolutely. And you mentioned David Goyette, and it's not like he's been non-existent. Sunday afternoon, for example, he had a plethora of opportunities. I believe it was Friday night. He had a penalty shot, couldn't bury it in the back of the net. On Sunday, he had a breakaway, couldn't bury it in the back of the net. He had multiple opportunities, and it's just not just Musty and David Goyette up front. You got guys like Evan Conyon, who's had a really strong start to the season. Coach Adelek, who's been playing on a different gear so far. Even some of the younger kids as well. And on the defensive end, Andre Anania, he was on a 5-game point streak before Sunday afternoon's game. They're getting help from the back end as well. So like I said, it's so early on in the season. You kind of get this sense that they're going to break through at some points. And again, you got guys coming back from development camps. Musty, who it appears like he's maybe still just trying to kind of re-navigate himself back into the Sudbury Wolves organization and how they run their system of things. David Goyette just back as well. And the Wolves are still without Matthew Mania as well. They will be very, very excited to have him back on the back end. An LA Kings draft pick, Alex Footon, Chicago Blackhawks draft pick, who will consistently be a strong, gritty forward for Sudbury. Lots of good things ahead. And like I said, it's a weird time for them right now. Not a terrible start to the season at all, but you can tell there are still a few things that need to be worked out.
Yeah, oh, for sure. And we're still seeing that with teams like the Saginaw Spirit and the London Knights, Guelph Storm, the list goes on. Teams are still trying to figure out their systems, waiting for players to come back. But the one thing I'm curious about is the goaltending. So we saw Krawchuk here in the preseason. He looked sensational, but now you've also got the import goaltender. What's the goaltending situation looking like for you guys?
Well, it's true. That's been a question mark, I think, the last couple of years. And you just look to last season, obviously, Wolves management, they tried to shuffle some pieces around. They tried to make some moves. At one point, we had Joe Ranger. You might remember that. And then much to the surprise of fans, and it was a tough one for fans. Well, the Wolves went out and they got the other kid, and I am drawing a blank on his name because I just woke up from a nap. But Joe Ranger.
I can relate on the nap front.
Yes, exactly. But Joe Ranger was obviously traded away and no longer in the Wolves organization, and that was a big deal. And so they brought in some decent tending, and Nate Krawchuk got quite a bit of play last season as well. It was an overage goaltender that they went and got. And so bringing in Jakub Vondras, the Carolina Hurricanes draft pick, he's been a treat to watch play. I feel like if you're a Wolves fan, the standard for excellence in goaltending is the year of Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. You might remember when he played for the Wolves that one season, and that was also the year of Quinton Byfield when he was in town. The Wolves were they had the playoff run where the Ottawa 67s put them out. A triple overtime game that put them out. That was an amazing year, thanks to some stellar goaltending from Luukkonen. And I'm just going to say that Jakub Andrus, he is definitely on a different level, and I think the way he plays, the way he handles himself back there, is what the Sudbury Wolves need. And Mike, you can see this too on any club, really. When your goaltender is playing well, or you have a goaltender that you can rely on, that you can trust, you start to see your defense making a few more risky moves. You start to see your forwards making a few more risky moves. You know that your goaltender is going to make the play back there. You know he's going to play the puck. You know he's going to stop the puck. And that's been huge for Sudbury. And Jakub Vondras, again, a Carolina Hurricanes draft pick. There's a level of maturity that you can see from him on and off the ice, which I think is going to be huge, huge for the Sudbury Wolves down the stretch this season. You mentioned Nate Krawczyk, too. He's a fantastic guy. They've got a 1-2 punch there in goaltending, which I feel like the Wolves haven't had in a long time either. And so that's why I say, in a complete sense of the matter, the Wolves, from their forwards to their defense and even through their goaltending, they are just they look so good. And maybe a bit of a up and down start so far, but Jakub Vondras, yeah, I think he's going to fit really well, even more so as this season continues.
Well, it's one of my favorite rivalries, having been on both sides of the broadcast table with the Barrie Colts and the Sudbury Wolves. So it's exciting to see these two teams, maybe being a little more competitive this year. And I don't know, I'd kind of like to see a Colts Wolves playoff matchup. Maybe we'll see that this year.
And you know what, Mike? Barrie's not that far from Sudbury. I'd be willing to make that drive every single game as well. Oh my goodness, I feel like no matter how each team is in the standings, and I think at last check they were actually relatively close in the Eastern Conference. I mean, we're so early into the season, right?
Yeah.
I feel like that would be a phenomenal series. The one other thing I wanted to add about Sudbury, and it's kind of a credit to their defensive work as well, is they've been able to hold their opponents to very few shots, and that's been very consistent already early on in this season. I believe they outshot the Ottawa 67s on Sunday afternoon, but they held Ottawa to very little shots. You might remember last year, Sudbury Wolves, and in past years, we had guys like Mitchell Weeks, who was playing for Sudbury.
Yep.
There would be games where the Wolves goaltending would be facing 40, sometimes 50 shots in a game.
Yeah.
And if you're unfamiliar with hockey, that is a lot. And so the Wolves have been averaging, allowing, low 20s-ish or so far this season, which is a credit to their defensive work. It really is. And I think, once the snake-bitten forwards can kind of jump out of that lull that they're in right now, watch out for this Wolves team. It's going to be a lot of fun down the stretch, I think.
Yeah, and that first game between the Wolves and the Colts this Saturday night is going to be a ton of fun. So cannot wait for that. So Bryan Cooper, thank you for doing this, and have a good call tomorrow night against Mississauga.
Absolutely. It's actually really nice to be the one taking the questions instead of fielding them to you. And so I appreciate you having me on, Mike. And yeah, it should be a good game between Barrie and Sudbury. I hope we can do this again sometime.
Oh, most definitely. So that was Bryan Cooper, one of the play-by-play voices of the Sudbury Wolves. And as we mentioned, that first matchup between Sudbury and Barrie taking place Saturday night at the Saddlein Arena. You can catch that game on Rogers TV. And you always know when those two teams go head-to-head, it's going to be an exciting game. And it's going to be quite the battle because they face each other 8 times during the regular season. And if these two teams do happen to somehow meet in the postseason, there'll be fireworks and a lot of drama and excitement. So we got a long ways to go until we can start talking about playoffs. But still, it's always fun when the Sudbury Wolves come to town, and see what happens. So again, thank you for tuning in. And be sure to hit like and subscribe so you can stay up to date with all the happenings with the Barrie Colts and from around the rest of the Ontario Hockey League. Have yourself a great day.